Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the A to Z Running podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andi.
And I'm Zach.
This week on the A to Z Running podcast, we're discussing the universal topic of dealing with injuries.
Absolutely a necessary conversation for anyone who's in the midst of injury, but also a prevalent thought for runners because we know, unfortunately, not many runners have escaped their career without injury. So a thought, a reflection, some tips, as well as a good conversation about some of our own experiences that have informed some of these considerations. So we want to talk to you about that and more, but before we can, you need to go to AtoZrunning.com, click the word follow, and then on all of the places like YouTube and podcast apps like Apple and Google and all the other ones, subscribe.
Please and thank you.
Yeah, that too.
We just posted about loving the process. That's a big topic surrounding the sport of running, and we'll actually talk about that more later in the topic of dealing with injuries. But in this specific post, Kathy commented, and I want to highlight it, "I just love seeing what my body can do. Training to me is joyful. I can't decide which I like more, the training or the race. To be able to do this is such a gift." I love Kathy's attitude. We coach Kathy, and she brings the joy and the fun, and we absolutely love it.
And it is that much sweeter a gift when we can't fully enjoy it.
That's
Speaking
true.
of the injury conversation. So before we get to any of that, a quick word for those of you who intend to be running races in the West Michigan area in the next little bit. We wanted to just give a shout out to a few events, some of our favorites, as well as some that are near and dear to some people that we support. And so on August 3rd, this is a Tuesday night, the Magic of the Mile track event in Comstock Park, Michigan. So good. So
we know a lot of you out there don't live in the West Michigan area, but seeking out something like a mile race is a super unique opportunity. And whenever adults, like post-collegiates, are able to participate in something like this, it's just such an interesting and cool experience. So thank you to Run GR for putting on this kind of event. We also have on August 14, Brainy Day Trail Run in Nunica, Michigan.
And so for those of you looking for a nice little trail run around this time that isn't, like a 50K or something crazy, this is a good one.
Maybe a good one to start with. You think?
Yeah. Well, if you haven't run trails before, better not to start on a marathon. So, yeah.
Yeah.
On August 28th, then, and a little bit more notorious, or no, it's famous, right? That's the positive one?
Yes, it's famous.
Light Point 5K in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
It's famous because we know the person who is heading it up, but it's actually the first year for this event, Zach.
Indeed. And so those of you who aren't familiar, Light Point is a flagship of New Holland Brewery. And so that's where the name comes from, and that's part of what's making it.
There's money prizes, I hear, or a gift card or something like that. So
good times, certainly. And then in September, one of our personal favorites, on September 19th, is the LMCU Bridge Run in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And this one, how many times? We've run this
a lot.
8 times maybe, including this year, because all things going as hopefully as well as possible, we will be there.
Yes,
we will be running.
Yes, it's a Ripley family favorite, and there is a 10-mile run and a 5K. So there's two options for you, but 10-mile runs are kind of unique, and they're fun races. So
lots
check it out.
of fun, and you should run it because you can get $5 off as well with our code A2Z. That is ATOZ for $5 off any event at the Bridge Run.
Thank you to Kyle Cutler.
Absolutely. And so those, and certainly many, many, many other things. But if you're looking for some good opportunities to run some races in the West Michigan area, those are some good options.
Well, speaking of races, let's get to the world of running. On July 17th in Canton, Ohio, there was a USATF Championship, the 6K for the women. Yes, a 6K.
What is that? 6,000 meters.
There are some of us who prefer to run a 6K on the road instead of the track, so maybe that's why.
Yes, but if you're going to run a race and you're going to say to yourself, 5,000, that's just a little too short. 10,000, no, way too long. Let's run 6,000.
Well, there is everything for the USATF circuit from the 1 mile to the marathon, and there is a 5K, Zach.
I bet there is not a 9,000.
Probably not. Okay, you caught me there. Yeah, so getting back to the event.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. So this was an event that was done in Canton, Ohio, like I mentioned, and the winner was new as far as the winning goes.
New to the pro scene.
New to the pro scene, a recent collegiate Taylor winner. She won her first title over Emily Durgan, and Emily Durgan has the most amount of points in this circuit, and she won in a final time of 18:21, which plays out to be about 4:55 per mile.
Yeah, so that's like 15:20 or under potentially for a 5K.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's significant, right? That's
a
good time.
On a road especially.
Yeah.
That's really good stuff.
Yeah. So I did want to mention, because I just said like points for the system, these are collected through all these events, like I had mentioned, from like the mile to the marathon. They collect points, and then there's like an overall winner.
Prize purse.
Yeah. So you can imagine, people like Sarah Hall have quite a few points as well, but the leading person right now is Emily Durgan.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. Making that money. That's good stuff. I love the USATF road circuit because, as Andy said, it covers a lot of different distances, and the races are all over the country. Mm-hmm. And so you can usually find some opportunities to jump in some of those, and they tend to be a little bit more competitive, more elevated, elite experiences. It's cool stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's jump over now across all of the ponds to Japan. And on Saturday, July 17th in Chitose, Japan, the Hokuren Distance Challenge finished its series, which this one is one of those things that it's a big deal in Japan, and it crosses a lot of different barriers and divides. Like you have the young kids racing, the corporate races, and the pros and everyone else. So this is the final installment of this year's series, and it was a middle distance focused meet, which is always interesting because Japan, you can think about it like this. Basically, the Japanese have, if you take out East African runners, all the rest of the great marathoners, barring a few here and there in the country, are Japanese. Like, their marathoning is incredible. But their middle distance running isn't even on the map, in contrast. So everyone looks at it and thinks they've got more potential in middle distance running. It's just underdeveloped, which is very, very true. And so in this instance, we saw some of that potential developing a bit because records were falling across the board for middle distance, and started with Hiroki Minamoto, who tied to the 100th, the 800-meter Japanese record.
Oh, that's like the kind of race that afterwards you're like, why didn't I just like throw myself across the line? Why didn't I like dive? Yeah.
You always can hope. And 1:45.75 is a fairly respectable 800 at that. So excellent work. And then Kazuki Kawamura set a new 1,500-meter record, which was only 7 weeks old, as it was, and chopped another second and a half off of the previous record. He ran 3:35.42.
A second?
Second
That's
and
a
a
lot
half
in the 1,500-meter run. Yeah.
It is. And what's most interesting about that same 1,500-meter race was Kaida Sato, who broke the under 20, under 18, and high school 1,500-meter records all at once when he ran 3:37.18. Also good for number 3 all-time on the Japanese list. So he's 17 years old, folks.
17.
Yeah. So we've been talking about Hobbs Kessler around here, who had 18, 3:34, which is amazing. Yeah. Well, we've got some more of these kinds of things happening in other places too. It's good stuff. Okay, and then for the women's side in the 1,500-meter, another national record, and this one was Nozomi Tanaka, who broke her own 1,500-meter national record to run 4:04.08.
That's exciting stuff. Well, in Gateshead, England, we had the London Gateshead Diamond League.
London/Gateshead, because it would have been in London.
It would have been London, but it wasn't.
But they relocated.
Yep. So that was after we had published, and it was like right after, right?
It's the same day of last week's episode.
Yeah. So we didn't get a chance to cover this yet, but this was I posted some on social media. But anyway, men's 3,000 was the race to watch. We're going to link to it if we can find it, because it was so fun to see national records going down.
So exciting. So the 3,000 meter is another one of those races that, because it's not an Olympic event or an international event in outdoors, it is in indoors, by the way. It's a world championship event in indoor track and field, but not in outdoor. And so as a consequence, you don't see it raced very often outdoors. But Diamond League made a decision recently to not hold the 5,000 meter at the Diamond League circuit anymore. So instead, the 3,000 is the longest event for the Diamond League circuit, which is just strange. Yes, we can say it. That's odd. But anyway, so when you see fast runners jumping into 3,000, things get crazy sometimes. It's basically like, think about a 3,000 like this. You're basically running a mile as hard as you can and then doing it again, hopefully as fast. That's the way it feels, at least, to run. Yeah. It's 2 miles, but by definition, by the way, your VO2 max often is somewhere, it's happening somewhere around this distance for a highly conditioned athlete. So we're talking about people are basically running at 100% VO2 max for 7, 8, 9 minutes.
Holy cow.
Ouch.
That does not
feel
good.
That hurts.
No.
And so you see the pain on their faces as they're coming in, and in the final kick, you've got all these legendary, like Stewie McSwain of Australia, legendary athletes in there, and it's just like, what's going to happen? Well, the legendary athlete who won it has been making waves for Spain, Mohamed Katir, for his, count it, third, 1, 2, 3 national records this season. He broke the 5,000 meter record, running 12:50. He broke the 1,500 meter record and now the 3,000 meter record when he ran 7:27. Wow.
It was a really great race, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff.
Incredible. So by the way, there was another national record in the same event, and this was for Italy. Give me a second while I try to say this name. Yemena Berhan Crippa of Italy broke the Italian record in 7:37.90. An excellent time as well.
Someone we've been discussing a lot as of late, and many of us are big fans, Kate Grace won another Diamond League title in the women's mile.
What a season.
What a season, and what a way to demonstrate strength, because when the kick began, there's no question. She was the one with more gears than anyone else.
So that was an exciting race because it wasn't terribly fast. And so as a consequence, there were a lot of people in the race
at
late.
the end, yeah.
And some people don't like that, the whole tactical race thing. And they're like, it's just a sprint then. Like, well, yeah, when you're an 800-meter runner who can run 157 and clearly are on top of your game with, 3 PRs in a row for Kate Grace.
3.
And already showed that you can win Diamond League races. This was exactly the race Kate Grace wanted to happen. And short of being able to ask her right now if that's true, I'm betting money that was exactly the race Kate Grace wanted to have happen. And she just showed up big.
Yeah. Yep.
Ran away from them all.
Now we need to shout out another, because Kate Grace was on the podcast before, and we've had another champion in this Diamond League series, and that was Cindy Sember. You'll remember her as Cindy O'Feely on our podcast. She won the 100-meter hurdles for her second Diamond League victory this season. Now, you'll remember that she is from representing Great Britain, and she will be going to the games very soon, so you'll want to look out for her. Something interesting, Zach, is that this was her second Diamond League victory at the same place. So Gateshead has been good to her. So
you've got the home soil kind of thing because, England and from representing Great Britain. And apparently she just runs well on this track.
Yeah.
There's this little thing that sometimes happens where people are like, this person runs well on this track, which is kind of a strange, but maybe not. Maybe not. There's something potentially involved there.
Yeah.
So nice well, Cindy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for some general Olympic news, and there is a lot of it, and we're not going to attempt to get into too many different things at the moment. Just know that we have an Olympic preview coming for you next week, and it's going to be thrilling in all its forms and fashions as far as a preview can be. But we did want to mention a few little tidbits of news lately, things like the accommodations, which apparently, Andy, have been interesting.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak to everyone's situation,
no.
but I've just seen a couple of things from athletes saying that they've just had interesting experiences so far, like no AC, and then like Paul Giulimo posted that they're going to be sleeping on like these cardboard beds. So I'll link to
Apparently,
his
to
tweet.
discourage athletes from frolicking in the non-athletic extracurricular. Thank you. Although I guess it is athletic sometimes. So extracurricular form and fashion. Andy's blushing right now. For those of you not watching on YouTube, you ought. Now, in saying all of that, you need to go check out Paul Chalimo's posts on this because they're funny. They're quite funny.
Yeah, and if this truly is the case, I'm just wondering when people are trying to compete at the top of their game, how their sleep will be.
No
I
comment.
Don't know.
No
so
comment.
You'll check out his photos.
Moving on. Some disappointing responses from. So this happened, and this is always the case. This is not new. It's never been new, but it is a little bit frustrating. And what it is that I'm talking about is how discrepant different national policies are around sending athletes to the Olympics. So you'll have a situation where you have athletes going to the Olympics from one country and athletes who are potentially even higher performing, but from another country, and they're not going, not because they couldn't qualify, but because their country just simply won't send them. And there's a number of reasons why this may have happened over the years, but it's frustrating to me because I see that and I think to myself, it's two things at once, right? First, it's good for the sport because anyone who knows that person immediately cares more about the sport and the games because they know this person who's an Olympian, and that's incredible stuff. But also, it honors the efforts of that individual athlete. And so whatever the rationale that a nation gives, I always find it very hard to say that that's a better reason than simply you did all this work. The Olympic Committee has invited you to attend, the International Olympic Committee has invited you to attend the games, and we as a governing body of our country are going to say, yes, do it, and we'll back you. And for those countries that choose not to in that situation, I haven't yet seen a reason that suggests to me that it's good enough. But here are some of the examples that tend to be fairly common. New Zealand recently has gone under kind of the scrutiny for theirs, and their policy is simply that, and this is not a perfect policy, but what it is and what it tends to be is that you have to be in the top 16 ranked in the world. And if you are, then they'll send you and back you. And so obviously, there's plenty of athletes who qualify for the Olympics but aren't in the top 16. You've heard us talking about the world top 20 lists lately. They're huge and incredible. So it's hard to be in the top 16.
Yeah.
Well, if you're from New Zealand and you aren't in the top 16, they might not be sending you.
Wow.
Sweden, even stiffer, won't send athletes who aren't in the top 8. Not some athletes who aren't in the top 8.
You have to be a finalist, like someone who would be in
to
the
be
finals.
able to qualify for the finals. So like they've got a 158 who's been running 159, 800-meter runner, which is blazing fast. She's not going.
And the thing that's really bothersome about this is because athletes are not training to peak during their season. So if they didn't have the race that would put them on the list high enough, it doesn't mean that it's not possible that they're going to peak right and be able to be competitive, even at the very highest level. Even some podium contenders in the history of the Olympics, there are people who have come in much further back than 8th place and won. So I think it kind of limits the underdog magic that can happen at the Olympic Games. Yeah,
and we know in sport, and especially, so this is one of the things, we're never going to try to elevate one group over another, but one of the things I think the United States does very well with sport in general is they create a culture around the sport of all levels. So there are kids who are interested in the sport and playing the sport, and school levels and club levels and all these things. And by doing that, the very best only get better. But you discourage that dynamic from happening by saying, we don't even care about you unless you're one of the very best. How are you going to ever get there if you don't have that culture of sport? And so that's one of the criticisms that tends to fall here as well. Now, these policies are nothing new. We pointed out these two because they're two that have been being discussed on places like Let's Run, and there are plenty of other countries with very same or similar policies, but frustrating to us. Frustrating for those athletes specifically. Now, one other note that's curious and is going to just get only crazier, and we knew this, we all anticipated this, is the COVID stuff going on right now in Tokyo is unreal. Like, we're talking about situations where athletes have been sent home, Olympians sent home for breaking conduct rules around things like social distancing, for example. Not that they have COVID or spread COVID. They broke a conduct rule, sent home. And they were told, to the credit of the people sending them home, they were told, if you do this, you're going home. And then they followed through on it. But and that's so then people are testing positive, as you would guess. And so like teams are being quarantined, entire programs, like the Australian track and field team, the whole thing was quarantined. Thankfully, it turned out to be a false alarm and they were unquarantined. But like, how crazy would that be? A whole track and field team from a country for a 2-week quarantine. Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we go. Well, there
That's
is more to come. We mentioned that we're going to be doing some previews. We're going to be covering the Olympic Games. We're really excited, and we hope that you are too. If there's certain athletes you're rooting for, let us know, and
we're probably
we will
rooting
pay
for
attention.
them as well.
Exactly. So
exciting stuff. So the very best coverage of the 2021 or 2020, whatever they're calling it on the website, Tokyo Olympics, will be potentially here. Well, as noted, for the topic, we want to discuss injury. And here's the thing. So so many ways we can talk about something like this. I think the important point we want to make here is that runners have a very difficult time with injury. And that's not to suggest other athletes don't, but we're talking about running here. So we're going to talk about runners. And in doing that, it's probably very important for us before we get injured to think about this, and when we're injured to think about this, and then after we're done being injured to think about this. Why is it that we have such a hard time with this, and what can we do to minimize the hard timeness of it?
the hard timeness. I haven't heard it said that way, but it is a very difficult period for all runners. And like we mentioned earlier, almost everyone's going to deal with injury at some point if they run long enough. So we're hoping that this can shed some light and be some help to you, or send this to a friend who might be injured right now, because we're going to talk through our experience as well as what we've learned from others.
And full disclosure, I am currently at the moment of speaking in the midst of some kind of injury. It's a little bit undiagnosed because I have an MRI scheduled, and we'll see. But so this comes a bit from everything we're about to say. I'm literally speaking firsthand from my moment of experience. So that might help you as you detect some of the strength of our arguments, if you will. So what we want to try to do here is just kind of lay out for you some of the experiences we have when we're in the midst of injury, and some of our reactions to that in terms of maybe suggestions or tips or just thoughts to help us in that struggle.
Mm-hmm. So first, runners, we love running.
As you know.
And often not as much other things.
Yeah.
So when we get injured, it's tough because what we really want to be doing is running. We don't really want to be cross training and cycling and doing these other things, even PT exercises. We're just like, we don't really want to do that. We just want to run.
How many times have we suggested to an athlete, here's some strength and mobility work that would be really good for you? And they're like, I don't really like doing that. I just want to run.
Right.
Like, yeah, us too, which is why we do that stuff, so that we can run more, better.
So the problem is, okay, you can imagine, and maybe you've experienced it. We certainly have, is that we just continue to try to run if it's possible while injured. Even sometimes after we know the injury, we'll sometimes continue or rush the process. Yeah,
and so a lot of it just comes down to, I really just only know this one thing. I really only like to do this one thing. And so even if I'm like hurting while I'm doing it, but I can somehow bear it, I just do it anyway. And things like that. So as you can guess, one of the top suggestions here is find something else to do and get better, recover. And this is, so I'll speak again from experience. We have mentioned on the podcast the Passion Paradox by Steve Magnus and Brad Stulberg. And in doing that, I read this right around the time when this experience I'm mentioning in a moment was happening, and so it was fuel for this for me as well. But after some struggles in a season for me, I found that I just needed to find a different activity for a bit, so I could get over that, and I started cycling like more seriously for the first time ever. And realized very quickly that all the competitiveness of what I liked about running, and not everything I love about running, but all the competitiveness, I could immediately channel into cycling, and I loved it. And so I could just like, go into it in kind of crazy mode, which is not always healthy. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But so for me, it was only ever one thing, only ever running. And then I realized I actually really do enjoy cycling. And there's a little bit of me, and I don't want to say this out loud,
but you're on a podcast.
There's a little bit of me that kind of likes when I can't run for whatever the reason is, because that's the only time that I ever cycle. Otherwise, I'm doing too much running, and I don't want to try to add more cycling on top of the running that I'm doing. And so the only time I really cycle is when I'm hurt or something like that, and I like it. So I don't always mind that much. That's my point.
Well, you don't have to have an athletic passion to be your other passion. Like, you could choose something like home improvement, music, art, reading. There's obviously so many things.
It's never a bad idea to take to things like cleaning as a passion.
I think he's telling me this.
No.
Okay.
Well,
so,
anyway.
I did want to mention too, Alicja Konechek, who is previously on the show, and she is an Olympian for Poland. She'll be competing in the 3,000 meter steeplechase. Anyway, I'll link to her podcast episode where she talked about having another hobby, how that is important in goal setting. So like when we have things that will sidetrack us, like having another goal, like having something completely different can really help us through those challenging times.
Definitely. That's good advice. So the next on the list here is because consistency and training over time. And you hear us say this so much. Quality training over time is the key to success in running, right? And because we know that and we all believe it, and because it's so important for running on the whole, when there's an interruption to that consistency, we feel like devastated. Like, I've just lost it all. Like, how many times, Andy, have athletes said to you, I'm losing fitness, or how much fitness am I losing because I have to take 2 days off? And it's like, none for 2 days off. But when it's 2 weeks off, when it's 2 months off, that's a real concern and very frustrating.
Yeah. And I think, too, we have these goals, and when we feel like those are lost, it is something to grieve. And if we don't see it like that, like if you don't feel like we need to grieve it, we do all of the stages of grief, like denial, and like starting with denial.
Are you talking to me right now?
Yeah. So I think that it's good to keep in light of this idea, because while it's true that consistency and training over time is what is going to help us improve the very most, when we are off for a few days, like Zach said, you actually aren't losing it. So like when things start to happen and niggle shows up, our suggestion would be take care of the niggle, because you don't want to have to take months off if it's avoidable. Another suggestion that we have is looking at ourselves more than runners. And, like we think we're losing fitness, we're losing consistency. Well, taking that step back and seeing ourselves for more than being a runner is a good thing too.
So, and definitely, what is it that helps my body be better at running that isn't running? And so this whole idea of like I'm losing everything when I can't run doesn't have to be true. There's other things we can do to help make the running happen better as well, especially once we're back to healthy and all of that. And that can include things like cross training, cycling. I already mentioned that. Cycling is a good aerobic activity if you do it right. And that's actually an important emphasis, because there are two things I see that happen a lot when I see people cycling who are hurt or can't run and want to get back to running. One is that they're riding too easily. They're not riding hard enough. And as a consequence, it's really not that aerobic, because they're not actually getting their system elevated enough. It is significantly harder to elevate your system to an aerobic level on a bike than it is running. It's just purely fact. And so as a consequence, we have to ride in a different way, and it's horribly uncomfortable. And so for runners to just jump on a bike and ride at that level. And so then the mitigation here is the other thing I see people do is they're riding too hard for too much resistance.
Picky,
I know, too much resistance. And so they're just like, they're pushing hard, and then it becomes like a strength endurance thing, which is also not the goal with that. So what we're looking for with these kinds of things is like, I need to be highly aerobic. And so like repetition of the cadence matters there. So like I'm on a bike and I want to have the resistance such that I can have a really high cadence. And then the difficult thing is I have to keep the really high cadence, which is not comfortable for a long time. And that's how I get that. So just, I'm parsing here, but I'm parsing on purpose, because if we're so worried about losing fitness, we should be concerning ourselves with what are the things that I can do to mitigate that.
And on a similar note, this is a very specific tip, but we love to give really practical tips here. Aqua jogging. Now, aqua jogging is tricky because for some people it is very, very challenging and can bring up your heart rate. But for others, using the belt, it becomes easy to kind of slack off on it and go too easy. And so I did some aqua jogging last summer. I had a little foot problem and I would not wear the belt. And then that became too easy even then over time because I was doing it so often. And then I would put my arms in the air so I wouldn't have my arms in the water, and that would get my heart rate up. I obviously couldn't just do that for like an hour straight without my arms. So I did like bring them back in and like, put them back up and kind of went back and forth between the two. But it did help me have my heart rate a little higher so that I was actually getting some benefit from it.
And anyone who's trying to picture this right now, Andi is like a human bobber. Somehow she can stay afloat with her hands straight up in the air, feet straight down, just moving her feet up and down in a running form. Like, how do you stay afloat? She has this uncanny buoyancy that shouldn't be possible, and yet somehow
I'm not
is.
that buoyant. I don't know.
Well, anyway, so this next item then on the list is how we, as runners, and I'll be direct, I am stubbornly habitual.
He is.
And inflexible with my running side of things. Well, with everything, really. But with running especially. And so you can probably relate because this is a very common tendency in runners. I'm not suggesting it's universal, but very common. And so think about like one of the hardest mental health related deficiencies that runners experience is what they call the obligatory runner, which is when my running becomes so unhealthy because I feel obligated to it. But why? And that's not a good thing. And so when things like injury happen, the slide is real, and I go to bad places fast, and it's not good.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a fine line between like a dedicated runner and an obligatory runner. And I think that a lot of us can kind of cross the line in different periods of time because it is such a nuance. But, and I know this is all like psychoanalysis, but to be able to view our running as something that is serving us and we are not serving it, it makes a humongous difference in the way that we approach our running and our training and then our mindset about injury.
And not to cut off Andi's good tips, but in thinking what part of another reason why this tends to happen for so many of us is that because so much of life is not in our control. If you've got work, kids, and other things that you don't feel like you control all the time. But yet, for many of us, running is one of those things. Like, I can decide how much I run and when I run and, that kind of thing, whether I run hard or easy. So I can have that control. And then when I lose it, it's like, that's the only thing I had. So that's tough. Yes, but Andi, a good suggestion there. I think in general, too, for those of us who the routine and the habit is something that's very hard for us to let go of. We don't necessarily have to, but we have to just simply, stubborn people struggle with creating new routines. So the first step must be, I need to force myself to create a new routine, make a plan, a new habit. And especially to realize that this is not a permanent thing. This is temporary most of the time. This is temporary. And as a result, I just have to try to come up with how can I deal with this for now and have a good routine established for that.
Yep.
And that's easier to do when I have a plan that shows me an end. That's good. So this next one, this is a difficult. We're gonna try to make this practical for you, but so many of us, myself included, we convince ourselves that our well-being and our fulfillment are closely related to or because of running. Right. So I feel that running is a thing that helps me feel fulfilled, or I feel like I thrive in part because of running, which is true.
Yeah.
So this is why it's so difficult, because this is a true statement. For anyone who is a regular runner and you feel like you're thriving in life, I'm guessing running is a part of that positive contribution. As a matter of fact, when we work with our own athletes, we try to help make a way for running to be a positive contribution to the rest of your life. So it helps you thrive. So then when you lose it, a piece of your thriving has been taken away. And that is both true, but also a very dangerous place for us to find ourselves. Because, as Andi has noted, it gets very closely tied to our identity.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about it. We think about it. We post about it. We tell people about it. We say we're a runner. We even use that identifier, I am a runner. And that becomes so much part of like our identity, as Zach said, that when we get injured, it's like, who am I? I don't know who I am anymore. Like, what am I going to talk about? How am I going to function when this is like my daily routine? And it's not only mental and physical, but it's also emotional and social. There's so many dynamics of this that make it so much harder than just like, oh, I can't play basketball for a week.
Right.
Except I think that basketball players, I just downplayed their identity
well,
stuff
that's
with
because
their
it's a
sport
lesser
too.
activity. So.
No.
Oh, no, it's not. Oh.
That was, yeah. Anyway, not a great comparison there. But what I'm saying is that it's difficult when we have so much drive and so much community and so much joy in something that when we don't have it anymore, we feel pretty down.
Yeah, all very true things. And there's an interesting thought experiment here. So there's a number of schools of thought, and I'm not going to suggest to you what you need to believe about this, but some say that we are the preponderance of our things, and that creates the who am I. So the who am I is answered by all of the things combined. And then others would say, and this is where we tend to fall in our opinion of this, that our identity, who we are, must be an answerable thing after we've stripped away all of these other things. So can I still answer the question, who am I, if I don't have running, if I don't have this other thing I like, if I don't have these other dynamics that are in partly things that are defining me, my work or my, all that kind of stuff. And this is where it becomes a very difficult thing, because if I feel like I can't define myself, if I can't answer that question without running being a part of it, then it makes it a very difficult experience to go through something like an injury. And I think about Andy's dad when I say this, and so shout out to Andy's dad. He had in his 30s multiple hip replacement surgery experience, and was told he would never run again. And so then he has to answer the question, who am I now that I can't do this
He's
thing?
very athletic, man.
Very athletic. And not just run. I mean, playing like basketball, soccer. Like very athletic. And that was a huge part of his life. So for many of us, it's a temporary thing. But in many instances, it's not. And we still have to be able to answer that question. So that's a challenge. Now, we're not trying to get existential here necessarily, but we are trying to think about, if I am elevating the sport to such a degree that I can't find myself without it, that it is my coping mechanism for everything or anything or other things left in life. If it's so closely tied to my self-satisfaction, I think about it, Andy, you were the one who mentioned this. Things like my appearances and how I dress, and and that's all tied together. So what do we do about that? First, I did want to mention that it's really important to just be open and honest with our emotions with these things. It's very hard to deal with that sense that we're trying to describe if I don't realize that that's what I'm feeling. And so for runners, how many times when you've been hurt or you've missed a run and your spouse is like, hey, you're really grouchy today. Or your kids are like, hey, you're really grouchy today. And then you're sitting there thinking to yourself, yeah, it's because I can't run. But there's a little more to that, obviously, right? And so I think it's valuable to be honest about and open with myself that I'm feeling this and it's real.
Yeah, and I do want to shout out to the mother runners, Whitney Hines, because she's been through a lot of injuries this past year, and she's been open and honest about this process. And I think it's really great to hear from other people who have been through injuries. And she reached out to me. We've been in discussions for a long time because she knows I've dealt with my hip labrum tears and, all that accrued for me. And I think that it's really a good idea to speak to others or to try to seek out other people's experiences so that you can kind of articulate your emotion through reading their reflections as well. Because sometimes I read something and I'm like, yes, that's what I'm feeling and thinking.
Yeah. And the final note about this one in particular is this whole fulfillment thing. It's always important for all of us to remember that any person can be fulfilled without the thing that I feel like I'm losing in that moment. It's possible. It is possible. Obviously, it has to be because running is the kind of thing that you can lose suddenly for the rest of your life and never have it. And to suggest that a person can then never be fulfilled the rest of their life would be absurd. So it's possible. What I have to do in this moment now, once I've been honest with myself about my emotions, is think, what is it that I can do right now about this and take action so that I satisfy I'm doing what I can. But then the next step there is, and how can I ensure that I am still a fulfilled person and a thriving person during this time? Because I owe it to myself. I owe it to the people around me, not to be the grump and the grouch to my spouse and my kids when I'm hurt.
Yeah, and if you
Right,
believe
Andy?
that you've been
For
created,
me.
and if you believe that you've been created for a purpose and that you've been created with value, then to believe that about yourself also does respect to the creator. If you believe
Allow
that.
me to say to every one of you listening, you are worth more than your running. That is a fact. And so let's live in that.
Yeah.
Now, this next one's really practical. So many of you, like us, do a lot of things that relate to running, and many of your social interactions are connected to that. And so as a consequence,
If not all of them. No.
it could be all of them for some of us. You know, you're busy in life, work, kids, otherwise, whatever your situation, you're busy in life. And so a lot of us say, well, my friends are like my running friends, because that's the time I have to be able to both run and be with friends. So I just find friends who also run.
Socializing,
Right.
Yep. I'm a very social runner, and that has definitely been part of what drives me to continue in this sport is the community. So, yup, it's more than a sport here. We're saying it again. It's also part of our community. And so losing that is really hard. So you're actually more lonely during this time that you
I have
already
no
feel
friends.
depressed. Yeah.
There's nothing I
I
can
know.
do. I'm just stuck at home.
So sad. It's
Yeah.
so hard.
And then when it's like I'm doing the stuff like the cross training or something, if I do that, then I'm probably doing it alone. And so then it's like, so some of us, shout out to Adam Lohman right now, who went for a bike ride with me this weekend instead of a run, because we were going to run together. And then, like I said, can't be doing that right now. And so he's like, oh, well, I'll just ride with you then, because I was going to be riding. And I'm like, oh, this guy, he's a friend. What a pal. Thank you, Adam. Also, happy birthday, belatedly again. So this moment there's some practical things that we could certainly try to do. And it has a lot to do with just like what I stated. If you have another activity that you can do and you've got some friends who are runners who are like willing to join you with some of that, great. Not everyone can, and we don't want to ever begrudge someone who's like, but I got to get my run in too during that time. So Andy had a great tip. If you can go to a gym.
Oh, yeah. If you can go to a gym, then you can ride next to someone while they're on the treadmill.
Or if it's an elliptical or whatever the thing is you can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. In the same sense, if someone's doing a running workout like at a track or something, and you can do like some core or PT exercises while your team, your group, your crew are doing their thing, you're at least still together-ish.
Yeah.
A bit. And even better still, if they're going to do any of that with you too, then you can still be around. So.
And also stay around the sport. Don't draw.
Oh, yeah.
If you can, go and cheer your friends on at their races. Maybe volunteer. Find a way to still be connected with the community.
And our final point in this specific list is back to that original comment that we run because we love running. And so sometimes as a consequence, we're very single-dimensional athletes in that sense. And so as a consequence, when running's not there, my general health also is at risk. And so, how running helps me be healthy physically.
Yeah.
For anyone who's a runner, that is probably true. It should be, because you're running. And so it is. Well, in that case, we're in that dangerous situation where if I don't change other things, the balance has been offset. And that messes with my circadian rhythms, that messes with my sleep, that messes with my eating habits, and all of that can be consequential.
This is something that I wasn't planning on saying, but I feel like I need to share. So if you're in the thick of it, if you're in an injury right now, I obviously can relate to you because I am a runner who's been doing this for a very long time. But I found that there was kind of like a reset of my body. And even though I was starting again when I was able to get back to running, I wasn't fit when I was starting. But I was able to build in a very positive way. and being able to have a PT and the support and a vision and some goals and the guidance of Zach, who's my coach, I was actually stronger coming back because I was doing it right. I was putting the building blocks in place, and I was able to look at myself with a fresh start. And so if you're in that place right now, see it, you can see it as an opportunity. I don't want to minimize your frustration and your pain, but there is an opportunity there to begin doing things correctly.
Yeah, and that's where you got to find the right way to stay balanced there and to get back into balance. And so that's a piece of that. So ultimately, if we can zoom all the way out, then I think just a few general comments. The first is, don't suffer the running frustrations alone. Like, you have your running friends, or you have your other people who especially have experienced these things. And don't totally isolate, because then what you find is it feels like I'm the only one. Like, everyone's posting on Strava, everyone's posting on their social media platforms other than Strava, right? Whatever those things are. And they're all talking about how fit they are, or they're running PRs, and it's like, I'm the only person in the world who's hurt right now. Well, you're not, because if you're hurt right now, so am I. But don't let yourself believe that. And so make sure that at the very least that, we got to stay engaged, as Andi was saying earlier. And in the same sense, it's really important to find people who can help me get out of whatever that position I'm in, because one of the worst things that happens with runners and injuries is we don't actually know why we got hurt, and we don't do what we might need to do to get better, weller, faster, if those are words that I can say. So find the people who can help.
I agree with that very much so. And for me, it was very helpful to have a PT that was able to tell me where some of my weaknesses were, and then also to have a coach, which I hadn't had a coach for a while before you started coaching me, Zach, because I wasn't really doing serious running yet. But having somebody else look at my training and someone else create my plan was way more objective, because I was full of emotion. I saw where I wanted to be. You've
never been full of emotion in your life.
Never. I saw myself where I wanted to be, and it was overwhelming to see the gap of where I was and where I wanted to be, and that brought on a sense of despair in some ways. And I don't know if you're there right now or have experienced that before, but getting the granular steps, what can I do right now to help myself get on track? And that's going to be, both in the broad sense of having other hobbies and other things that bring us joy, but also getting back on track, because we do love running and we want to get back there. So being able to have a plan that's very tangible.
And it's really good with these kinds of people who can help, coaches, physical therapists, running friends, to be able to have conversations about your experience that's frustrating with people who won't just roll their eyes at you like, oh, you're just this running addict who can't run, boo-hoo on you. There are people in our lives who might not get it and don't really know how it plays with us, as we've just described all of this stuff that it goes on in a runner's experience when they're hurt. And as a consequence, certain people will get that more than others.
Yeah, and it's good to have both, because it's also good to have someone if you're
perspective.
Yeah, like your mother, who's going to be like, I love you no matter what. So what, you didn't do 6 miles today? I don't care. I still love you, and you're still the same person to me. Who cares?
Yeah.
So it's also good to have people in your life who are like, yeah, you're still you, and it's okay.
I find that people like grandparents are great for this, for runners, because it's like if you have grandparents around who you can talk to about these kinds of things, they don't, it's like, I don't really care if you can and cannot run. I just love sitting in with you and talking to you. It's like, oh, thanks, Grandma. That's so nice. Great. Yeah. All right. Well, here's the final comment that we will make. Many runners think that injury is not the right time to find a coach, right? Because, I got to get healthy first. I got to, and I would simply completely disagree with you, where injury might be one of the best times to find a coach if you don't have one, or someone who can at least help you with where you're trying to go with these things. As Andi was saying, for so many reasons there, but also because that's a time when you're already trying to put the pieces back together in the best possible way. And these are the kinds of things that coaches may be able to support with. And of course, I'm leading the horse here what's that? I don't know that phrase. So I am basically trying to suggest that we would love to certainly help out if we can, or talk with you about these things, whether or not we are the best fit for you. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions and such, and talk with you about your goals and needs. And all of that is possible if you head to AtoZrunning.com/coaching.
And also, if you do have a coach, talk to them about stuff.
That's
if you're feeling a niggle or you're feeling something popping up, telling your coach sooner than later is helpful, and they want to help you. So
now Andy's talking to our athletes right now.
I'm
If
just saying
something's
in
bugging you,
general.
tell your coach.
Exactly.
Don't sit on it.
I do think it's good, though, for all of us to be reminded, because I know many of you, actually know some of you, and you have coaches, and I'm just saying in general, I think it's great to communicate these things. It's part of the journey, this journey that we're on.
And with that, this journey, at least in terms of this conversation, must now come to an end. So before you enter great sadness when our voices stop speaking, just remember that we'll be back on next week, and we've got some really exciting things to begin previewing for the Tokyo Olympics. Finally.